Thermal imaging technology is really, really cool. Some of the newer solid-state electronic units, like this one right here that's branded by ProPoint, they're just simply like those handheld thermometers. You basically hit the trigger and it displays an image on you. This, however, is still bottom of the market kind of equipment. What you're looking at here is, I'm pretty sure, one of the reference design Chinese specials, but someone has made a beautiful plastic enclosure around it, and as a result, it's grippy, it looks nice, it looks pretty, but this is 30 by 32 pixels in resolution, and it has no camera overlay, and it cost me, in early 2019, $300. Which even then, like, I probably paid too much money. But it still paid for itself. I kind of like it. I can't recommend the ProPoint one here because I'm aware I got it on clearance at $300. So Princess Auto doesn't sell these anymore that I'm aware of. What else did you get for $300? Well, you got this beautiful carrying case. You got a manual. You got a software on a CD-ROM. Or actually, no, it's a burned CDR. It's a burned CDR with a label. And you got a USB cable. And the rest of this was just kind of wasted space inside the case. Really, I should have gotten a used FLIR at that point there. Thermal imaging technology is really cool. Like, it's not so much a novelty used in movies. You can use it for troubleshooting. You can use it for all sorts of actual serious tasks, which can make a device like this worth itself after not too much time. I use this one here for checking for thermal hotspots and irregularities in electronic circuits. Even though it's such a low resolution device, it's still pretty obvious when you have an IC that's overheating because it just becomes a white spot on a sea of blue. But this is still a very new and very modern device. Thermal imaging cameras have actually been in production now for, oh God, at least 50 years. We're going back to the tube-based era. Now, it doesn't say the resolution or the sensitivity of these older ones was, you know, well, all that great. But the idea here is that you were just simply detecting infrared energy and converting it over into something that within the visible light spectrum of our eyes, we could see and identify and we could work with. And it's just really, really, really handy in the scientific field. These early imagers are typically not easy to get. Here's a price list of some of these imagers from, I believe, 1979, 1980. What we're going to be talking about here today is the Hughes Probeye Model 650 down here at the bottom. That's $8,000 at the beginning of the 1980s. That is like a very luxurious car, I want to point out. And that was just scientific equipment. Now, how I got my Probeye, or even how I learned what it was, is kind of interesting. I have some popular science magazines. I do wish I had some more within the catalog, but you can actually look at them all for free in Google Books. But in November 1981, I believe, there is an article where they were talking about home energy auditing. Within that, it shows this guy holding this ridiculous box up to his face, which the article calls an infrared imager. You can see there's a gas cylinder on the bottom of this thing as well, which is just, okay, like, what's going on here? There's no details. It doesn't tell you what it is, other than it's an imager. It doesn't tell you how it works. It's just saying, I look through the viewfinder and I can see heat. What he's actually seeing through that viewfinder is kind of like the same thing you saw in like Predator or a lot of those other cheesy movies where it's like detecting heat. It's pretty much the same thing. But I couldn't find any information on what that was, and for a good part of like 15 years, like, sure, like, it was in the back of my head, if I ever see anything like this, I'll grab it, or at least I'll be able to know what it is. In October of 2022, I was down in Seattle, and RePC had exactly that. It was just kind of lying in a pile of decayed foam, so it was sticky, it was nasty, but everything seemed to be kind of there in the bag. Apparently what happened is that someone just kind of dumped the contents of a box in the as-is section, bought the box, and just left the rest of it there. But there was the imager, and I think I only paid like $25 American for it. It wasn't a whole hell of a lot of money, but at the same time, we had no way to test it. I've been trying for this video in the meantime, find a nice carrying case for it. Now that I have a nice carrying case for it, I'm now able to show you the imager. And I have some documentation now for it as well. In this Porter cable case right here is the imager. I've had to repurpose this case and just stuff it with foam, but again, it's such a nice device, I might as well put it into a custom case. So let's open it up. There's my manual. And there's the infrared viewer. This is the Probi Model 650. Anyways, as we can see here, it is manufactured by the Hughes Aircraft Company, the Industrial Products Division. Hughes got involved in a lot of things beyond just aircraft and the Spruce Goose. We know of their satellites quite well because that's basically the backbone of all DSS satellite services. What do you think the SS stands for in DSS? And thermal imaging cameras? Sure, no problem. They decided to go into that as well. So this is a neat little relic. It's completely made out of metal, but we're going to take it out of its carrying case here. So the imager is bulky, to say the least. It is huge. You have this handle here, which you're used to carry it. You can sit it onto a table or a surface like this, and it will support itself. You grab it by the handle, you can take it off. This handle here is also, I'm supposing, is supposed to be like your hand grip. Like thumb goes there, hand grabs it from the top, and now you can't actually reach this control right here. You have to hold it with two hands, and then you're able to use this thing. So let's go for a little bit of a tour. As you can see, clearly labeled here, we have our brightness and our contrast. This one here doesn't really have any end stops externally, but it's nice and smooth, so there's obviously a potentiometer in here somewhere. For the contrast, it does have an end stop and a little peg. This one here, they really don't want you cranking down on. If you go over to the side over here, two knobs. They are labeled slightly differently. These ones have arrows, these ones do not. We have an on-off switch that's hiding right here, and we have a battery charger connector right here. It's this 7-pin Amphenol connector. The battery charger here, I only have part of the battery charging system, and that's this thing right here. This is the car charger kit. So on this side here, plug it into your cigarette lighter, your accessory jack on your vehicle. There's a warning on this little blue box that says, install in vehicle with 12-volt DC negative ground system only, which just helps to tell you just how old this is. We haven't had positive chassis vehicles in decades. And then on the other side, you have this, frankly, I call it fragile 7-pin Amphenol connector. And you would just plug this in here, and there you go. And then I'm assuming you give it like 12 to 16 hours to charge. The batteries in this thing hide behind here. I'll get to that in a moment. These batteries are just these like packs of rechargeable coin cells. I think they're like 1.2 volts each, stacked and then shrink tubed with a bit of wiring. And it's actually center tapped, so it outputs 12 volts and 9 volts for the various electronics inside. The battery pack, it says, lasts about, or should last about 4 to 5 hours before it needs to be recharged. And considering it's just coin cells, this thing does not use a whole hell of a lot of energy. There's a reason for that. So there's our battery charger there. On the back of the unit here, we have our viewfinder. There is no other additional ocular, dioptic, or focus control for the viewfinder. You just simply have this gray rubber cup held in with a snap ring, and you can spin it around so you can have it on either orientation as you wish. There's also some badges and markings here from its last time, or its last owners and last service representative. This equipment was serviced by Western Sensor in Idaho. And up here, it actually says Western Sensor is part of Red Eye. Solduck RD, okay, or Solidac? SOLEDUCK-RD. It's in this really fancy cursive writing. I'm not even sure why they've stamped it like that. But this is a metal badge. This is a plastic badge. On this side here, again, we have this handle which kind of dominates this here. We have a focus control, which also has a physical stop on it. This seems a lot more mechanical. There's something going on inside with this focus control, like it's got like a rack and pinion that it's moving around on. We have another metal asset tag here for the USDA Forest Service. So this is surplus equipment from the Department of Agriculture. Neat. And then, of course, we have the actual badge for the unit here, model number 650, serial number 11715. Lastly, on all the faces here, we have the front, and we have this lens right here, this square thing. It's very reflective. It's kind of got a gold tint to it. This is a coated filter. The idea here is that when infrared light enters into the imager, this filter is the primary location where it filters out everything else in the visible wavelength. When I look through this from the inside, I can't see anything. So it's a very, very, very narrow bandwidth filter. And of course, lastly, on the bottom side here, we have a couple things as well. So we have these two white discs. This is where the batteries are supposed to go. There's drop in there. There's a 3-pin wiring harness on either side. And then you would have these plastic discs and snap rings that would go in so you could then lock them into place. When I received this didn't have batteries in it, thankfully. Also, it's worth pointing out this is not a waterproof device, so it's not sealed or gasketed in any sort of way. Instead, I had a little box, and inside the box, I had some cabling. So this here obviously lines up with these two holes here. These are the connectors that would go to the battery terminals on the inside, and there's a 3-pin connector on the outside. This cable here plugs into there, and on the other end of this cable is 3 wires. I am assuming, going by what is in here, that someone was trying to build an external battery pack for this thing. Like, there's even drawings and sketches trying to figure out exactly how this thing is wired, what the batteries were supposed to be doing. So I guess it would be like, instead of having the internal batteries, they wanted to have an external battery with this thing. Okay, cool, whatever. I don't have any batteries for this, so I can't really power it up. It's kind of complicated, and, well, I can finish this off here, but we have a considerably bigger problem that's also going to arise. This here is a tripod-compatible mount. Actually, hiding here in the other box of accessories, we do have this little strap adapter here, which just threads into there, and now you can have like a neck strap, so if you drop it, you're not going to drop and break the equipment. But this will also mount onto a tripod, and it looks really good, really, really professional. Lastly, however, we have this metal bracket here, and that is, of course, for the cylinder of gas that needs to go inside of this. When I got this, there was actually a plastic safety cap here over this port. If foam had gotten into this, this would basically be ruined. Where is the gas cylinder? Well, again, it's inside the carrying case. So I'll pull that foam out, and here we go. What this thing needs to operate is not just a battery source. It also requires a cylinder of non-flammable inert argon gas. As it turns out from the documentation, it needs a purity of about 99.97%. So I'm assuming just argon welder's gas is all you need. So with this also had a safety cap. You would take this off. You would take off the cap on this side. You would thread this on. Can I get a good angle of that? There we go. And there's a warning saying, be careful when you thread this. Don't cross-thread it. There you go. Strap goes over. Catches in. You tighten it down. And then there you go. Now you have the bulk half of this ridiculous thing, which now you have to hold in your hand. You have to aim at what you want to look at. And there you go. This argon gas is actually being used as a cryogenic cooler. I have to just quickly look into the manual here. The sensor in this thing is a little bit more than just an electronic device. Where is the specification for it? There it is. It defines the detector characteristics as photovoltaic indium antimonide. It has 6 detector elements, and it needs to keep the detector cooled to minus 186 degrees Celsius. The detector coolant is argon, a non-toxic, non-flammable inert gas. It also says in here that those 2 nickel-cadmium power cells, 1.5 watts. So between the gas cylinder and the minimal amount of electronics in here, I think it's safe to say this is very much an analog device. Oh, how I am not wrong in that regard at all. It also says that this cylinder here is rated for 4 hours of use. So Overall, the imager should give you about 4 hours of use before either you need to replace the cylinder or you need to replace the batteries. Every one of these that I've seen selling on eBay seems to come with a much larger case that comes with spare batteries and spare argon cylinders. These cylinders, as I take it off here, are not just like plastic bottles. Like, I'm sure some people have played paintball, they kind of know like the kind of weights and kind of pressures that go into it. This one here has a sticker on it that says 1200 psi 826.99, which is probably the last time this thing was used. And this also comes with a little pressure gauge. This just screws onto here. You'd open the valve and that will tell you how much pressure is left in the cylinder. Now, when you open the valve and this is all installed, there'd be about 30 seconds, and then a cryostat, once this satisfies at the correct temperature, it'll just kind of slowly sample and release the gas out of here so that it keeps the imager cool but also conserves the gas in the bottle. The bottle needs to be pressurized up to 5,000 psi. There is a lot of gas that has to get crammed into this little tiny bottle. And according to the documentation, once this here reads below 1,000 psi, I think last I checked, I have a photo of it, let me double check here, I think it was like 800 psi, and it says once it's below 1,000 psi, consider the bottle empty. Never run these bottles empty completely, because at that point there you introduce air back into it. It's the same thing as refrigeration systems. You kind of work on them semi-pressurized if you're doing a live part replacement. But they say otherwise, like if it goes down to that, you have to purge the tank before you can refill it. And I would really love to demo this imager here, but there's two problems. One is the battery, obviously. Two is that, much like every other gas cylinder under extreme pressure, stamped into the top of it here is a date of manufacture. It's the same thing with your barbecue propane tanks. They have an expiration date. So if I were to go into, say, an industrial gas supply house saying, could you please refill this with argon, they're going to look at that and say, sorry, the cylinder's expired, I can't refill that. It's a safety thing. I understand that, but as a result, I also can't get this refilled with argon as well. So both of the major components that this imager needs to operate, I just simply can't get. Now let's look inside of the imager. This is where definitely we begin to learn that this is an extremely analog device. Well, if I don't lose that dust cap first, let's put that back on. There were other competing products at the time that were available against the Probeye. The Probeye actually seemed to get like another 2 or 3 revisions before Hughes just stopped doing these altogether. Part of that may be because they went out of business or they just sold the whole division. I haven't done a whole lot of research on that. So to open this, it's not a gasketed device. It's not sealed with like dry nitrogen or anything like that. Like, you get this thing wet, you get this thing dirty, you're going to get dirt or moisture inside of the imager. That's going to be a problem. It does just have a bunch of hex screws around the outside edge. So give me a moment here. Okay, and there goes the last screw there. They are all the same length as well, and the same size of Allen key. So, when we open this up, remember, low power consumption, doesn't need a lot of battery power, and it needs a gas to operate. And it's also the late 1970s. This is absolutely beautiful. So what you are looking at is a complete analog device. All of these over here, I mean, there may be a couple of transistors, but you notice how there's just a group of 6 identical circuits. There are 6 identical LEDs operating in a line. And the way the sensor works here is that as the infrared energy passes through the filter, it hits a rotating mirror. There's actually an electric motor here, and the mirror assembly just kind of spins around. That then bounces the infrared energy off of another mirror, which then goes into our argon gas-cooled pickup detector tube hiding right here. This has, it looks like it was last serviced in March 1995. From there, it just goes through an early set of amplifiers, and then it runs over to this little board over here. This little board here, like I said, it's a group of 6 identical circuits, each one very delicately tuned, and these are probably just op amps and amplifiers. That's all it is. As you can see here, we have a group of potentiometers, which is stacked up here against our contrast knob. So that's how that works. The brightness knob, if I take this desiccant pack out of here, is just one adjustment, one small potentiometer. Let me put that desiccant packet back in there. There we go. So that then exits and comes back out, and it runs to the inside of the spinning mirror drum assembly, where there are yet more mirrors. So I'm sure everyone's seen that whole like perception thing. It's like alarm clocks and fancy novelty things. It's basically a giant spinning device with a linear line of LEDs, and to our perception of view and how we see it, it looks like a straight image, but it's just simply spinning so fast, and it's just flashing the LEDs that it looks like an actual full-sized image, and that's all it's doing. It's just spinning and flashing the LEDs, and it actually looks like 60 lines of resolution that's coming off of these 6 small LEDs. So that's an image sensor space of what? Like 6 by 10 or something like that. I can't really do the math right now. Anyways, it's something like that. But after that, it then bounces off another mirror, and then bounces up through this prism here, which then comes out of that, out the viewfinder, and that's how you see it. There is an hours meter that's hiding over here. You probably can't see this. I can. So this is up to 2,000 hours. So 2, 4, 6... It's like 700 hours have been logged on this, presumably since the last time the detector tube was serviced. And we have these wires here, which are the battery terminals for the 2 batteries that would sit in there. Those batteries, as you can see, they aren't sealed compartments. So if you do have batteries in this and it's sitting upside down, not only is it going to leak elsewhere in here, it leaks directly onto the electronics. So if you have one of these or you see one of these, make sure you get the damn batteries out. They're not rocket science to make some sort of replacement. As we can see, someone tried that already. Other than that, this is all there is to it. It's such a simple device. It's wonderful. This is how thermal imaging cameras were working in the late 1970s and through to the 1980s. And it seems like it was practical enough that it could have been done all the way up to the 1990s. Like we saw on the tube, the last time it saw a cylinder refill or a cylinder check was 1999. I never really thought that I would be saying to myself, I want to own an old thermal imaging camera, but here I am. I mean, that early thermal imaging camera that I showed you before, a FLIR, and pretty much every modern thermal imaging camera uses an electronic thermopile array. It's a solid-state device. They're small, they're expensive, but again, remember, this is $8,000 back at the end of the 1970s, so this wasn't particularly cheap either. But it's just so neat how they were able to make this work. You could see infrared energy, you could see heat. It uses a gas cylinder, it uses small batteries, it's pretty much entirely analog. It has spinning mechanical parts inside, and they were able to fit this all into this small, relatively small enclosure. And it seems like it sold relatively well, like USDA was buying into them, so it's guaranteed they had more than just one of these that they were passing around the United States. And at the same time, it's also interesting to look at, like, modern thermal imaging cameras will warn you, like, you can only go this far before, like, you can't see hotter. This is the same thing. The image sensor is sensitive, but not that broad range. Its dynamic range of where it can work is limited. Here it says between 0 and 100 degrees, which isn't great. That's basically watching a pot of boiling water go from out of the freezer, thawing, and then to boiling, and that's about it. But it seems here that this is branded by Red Eye, but this is also, again, from Hughes. There's an adapter and a filter set that was available, and this here allowed, that just bolted right here on the front of the imager, that allowed for you to work with a much broader range simply by changing the intensity of the filter on the front of the imager. It's kind of the same thing as a camera lens filter. So it says here, contrast control fully counterclockwise. Yeah, so you have 100 degrees Celsius here, which was pretty much with nothing there, all the way up to 725 degrees Celsius, or 1337 degrees Fahrenheit. is what you could do with this fancy little adapter that just kind of sit onto the front, and all it was is just filters. Like, it was a neat, practical, physical solution to a problem that made this even more useful. I didn't receive the filter set with this, but that's cool. And there we have it. This is the Hughes Probeye. Anyways, the Model 650 infrared viewer. It's a thermal imaging camera from the end of the 1970s. They were used into the 1980s. Some people were even desperate enough to use these well into the 1990s. Today, it's not entirely practical to use. There are far easier and cheaper thermal imaging solutions. But if you see one of these and they're not that expensive and you have just a spot on your shelf, there you go. If you want to get a neat looking like thermal imaging video that's recorded off of one of these, I'm going to link down in the description someone else who does have a working one, and you can see these like small clips of him either holding his hand up to it or looking at his dog. But other than that, that's all there is for this, and that's all there is for this video. I really hope you enjoyed this. If you worked with one of these thermal imagers back when they were in their prime, leave a comment down below. If you know anything else about these particular units here, maybe more information about the older ones, or not the older ones, the newer ones that were available. But if you do have information about older thermal imaging cameras, talk about that in the comments as well. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, have a good one.